In this video, I'll explore working with single-page scrolling websites, including how to structure and lay them out, as well as some specific CSS techniques for controlling things like scroll behavior so that you can animate the scroll smoothly, things like scroll snap so that the different sections align to the right place, as well as looking at things like parallax scrolling when it comes to background imagery. Let's get started. I'm here in brackets where I'm going to begin simply with an HTML template. I've got an HTML template plugin here, and I'm just going to go ahead and start with an HTML5 document. There we go. And what I might do is take the information here about the page and just put that right into the title. And then I've got my CSS style sheet, which can be an external file, but this is all going to be on a single page, so it could be legitimate to just style this all within a style tag and just keep all of my content all on one page, since it is a single page website. Then you don't have to go out and load any other dependent files in that case. In this example, I'll explore just maybe creating about 3 sections of content and navigating between those pieces of content. I'm going to put all of that content into a container. So I'm just going to use the generic div and not give that any special semantic meaning other than I want sort of a box to contain everything. And in that box, I'll have a header with a navigation inside of it. I know that I want those things. And then I'll also have at least 3 sections of content. So I could have sections, duplicate that out several times, and decide sort of what I want in each section. I might want a little bit of content in the sections. One way that I could do this quickly is using the Emmet extension here that's a part of brackets if you install it, or natively a part of Dreamweaver, for example. And so what I could do is use Emmet to have the shorthand markup to quickly mark up my content. So if I was doing that with Emmet, what I might do is say that I wanted a section, and I might want to label each of these sections with a unique ID. So I'm going to say section and then $, which will give them their own number here. And inside of that, I want really 3 sections, so I'll times that by 3. Inside of that, I'm going to have potentially like a second level header, an H2, and I do want maybe a little bit of lorem ipsum content inside of that H2, so I'm going to say lorem times 2, or lorem 3, which would be 3 words of lorem ipsum in that particular case. I'm going to wrap that here in parentheses, because next to that I also want a sibling of the header, which would be a paragraph. And that paragraph is going to have perhaps like 200 words of lorem ipsum in it. If I do that all as Emmet, all I have to do is hit tab and it will actually generate all of that content. I'd get a section with lorem ipsum, and you can see that I've got section 2 and section 3 IDs. So I don't need these other sections at the bottom, but certainly Emmet saves a lot of time in terms of our markup. And I've just got kind of 3 sections of content. I could also use Emmet within the navigation if I wanted to. So for example, inside this nav, I know that I want a UL tag, and in the UL tag, I'm going to have 3 list items, and each list item is going to have an A tag within that list item. So I could generate that out very, very quickly, and then simply make sure that these link out to each of the sections. So I'll call that section 1. It is the text, and that's going to link down to the ID of section 1, and I'll do that for these other sections as well. So this is going to link to the ID of section 2. I'll put that in there, and I'll make sure that it has visible text that says what section it's going to, as well as this last one. And so that will be section 3. And I want to make sure that I spell section correctly. It looks like I'm accidentally typing a little too fast right there, to make sure that I get the right spelling that corresponds with the spelling that I gave the individual sections. Okay, so I've now got a navigation with 3 items, and each of those link down to the particular sections that are on the page. That's basically the structure that I'll start with. And let's jump into the CSS for actually adding a little bit of style to this. Let's start our CSS with just a little bit of cleanup and reset. I do like to use a universal selector to make sure that I'm using the box sizing of border box on all of my content so that my padding and borders are all inset rather than adding to the overall size. So I'm going to start with that. Then I'm going to go to the body tag and simply get rid of the margin that's on the body. And what I might also do is just define a universal font family for this. And I'm going to use the font family of the system UI for this, which is usually a really nice font, actually a clean font. I think it defaults in Windows to Sago UI as the font. And so sometimes it's a really sort of clean, nice system font. And it doesn't require any download. It works right away. So those can be kind of a nice sans serif here. So there we go. I've got a little bit of content there. Let's style just a little bit more here. So what I'm going to do is target those sections. And I did want the sections themselves to take up the full screen. So I'm going to give them a minimum height, and that means that they can exceed this. I have more content than that, but they're going to have a minimum height of 100 VH, and so they'll take up at least a single page here. And we can see now what's happening is if I click on my links, I'll jump down to particular, potentially to particular different sections inside of the nav here, but each one is going to take up one full screen of content. And the navigation really isn't working in this live view because if I click on a link, it kind of selects it within the HTML. We've got this sort of live selection piece going. I could just save my page, Control S, and then open up a browser window here where I Control 0 and open up the file that I actually want. That's this single page scroller file, and we can take a look at that operating locally here. And then when I click on these sections, it will simply jump to that particular section. And so that's what I want, but it's a little disjarring just to jump to that section. So ultimately, I want this to scroll down. And of course, we lose our menu right now when we jump down. So I'd like to have my menu fixed and present at all times. Let's explore doing some of those things. I'll come back to the live view here, and we'll continue with some of our CSS. What we might want to do is take the content that's in our sections and maybe give them a little color or background images so that we can see those sections. And because I've named each of them with a unique ID, what we could do is target those unique IDs. So I'm going to say section 1, for example, and what we could do is give that a background. I'm going to go ahead and give it a background image, and we can sort of pull out our URL, and I've got images in an images folder and a series of different WebP photos that are there. So I could pull some of these images in, take a look at what that might look like inside of that section. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I want the background size simply to cover that content for now. We'll look at some other features of this, but I'm going to duplicate this out. Really what I could do is say that if we're using cover, we could add that to all the sections. I don't need to necessarily differentiate between the sections for that, but I do want different background images on each section so that we can kind of see that the content that's in those sections. So I'll do that here, and we'll have section 2 and section 3. And what we could do is just put in different background imagery into those particular sections. So I'm going to go ahead and reference my images folder where I've got a variety of different photos that I pulled off of Unsplash, and I'll populate those in to my design here. So I should have different sort of photos in each of these, and just to kind of represent the different content sections that are within the page. Now that I have that, I can see that there's some gaps between each of these, and that's being caused actually by the default margin on the H2s that are in there. So I might reference those H2s and do something a little bit different with those. And so within the sections, I'm going to go ahead and reference the H2. I might make the type of the H2 a little bit bigger, and so let's make that font size a fair amount bigger. I might make it based on the browser size a little bit. So let's say it was like 4 VW, we'll get a larger size. But on the margin, I want to remove the margin from the top. And you'll see that as soon as I do that, that closes that sort of overflow gap margin that's there. I might still want to have some margin on the bottom for these, so I can certainly do that. I'll say margin, and then what we'll want to do is have just a little bit more margin on the bottom. So I don't want it on the left or right, but I am going to have some margin on the bottom, maybe 2 VW on the bottom of that, or maybe even 3 VW, to have a little bit more margin on the bottom, and then 0 on the left side as we go around. Okay. Inside the sections, my content is pushing right up against the edge. And so let's go ahead and add a little padding to those sections in order to get that content off of there. Again, I'm just going to use the sort of viewport units and have this all kind of scalable within the viewport. So I'm going to say that I want maybe 4 viewport units of padding at least all the way around. And that will push that content off the edge. Maybe I do it even a little bit more than that, maybe 8. And so that content sort of pushes away from the edge. The section paragraphs can get a little difficult to read against those backgrounds, and really even the headers. These are real complex backgrounds. So I'd want to be strategic about how I have that content. Maybe I could have a container within them that has its own background. For right now, I just at least want to make sure that the paragraphs are more legible. So I'm going to target the section paragraphs and give those their own background color in this case. And so I'm going to say that it's going to be an RGBA, and we'll do a white color, but with partial transparency so that we see through those. I'll say maybe 0.7 as my transparency amount, and that would allow me to read that text a little bit better but see through that. And then we'll add some padding to this as well. I'm going to say that it's going to be 4 VW there to get just a little padding. Maybe we round the border radius, here round the edges off a little bit with some border radius, just to round that off just a little bit and have a little cleaner look to this. If I wanted each of these, you'll see that they're kind of aligning to the top of the section. If I wanted this content really to be sort of in the center or wherever it might be, and certainly the amount of text in each of these could vary a bit more. Right now I put 200 characters in every single one. I might want that to be a little bit different in different ones. I can always just pull out some of this dummy content and just decide to vary the amount of content in each one just a bit differently. But if I wanted that content to all kind of center within the screen, we could certainly turn to Flexbox or Grid for that. And what I might want to do is tell the sections here to display as Flex. And this puts the different elements side by side. So what I'm going to need for that is the flex direction here. Rather than being in a row, I'm going to tell them to be in a column so that the header and the body copy stack instead of going next to each other. And then if I wanted these to align, what we could do is we could make sure that if we wanted them to be centered, we could justify the content into the center, and so that would allow that to sort of justify down our page. And what we might want to also do is make sure that the align items is on in order to center our content horizontally and vertically. So then each of these sections will be kind of right in the middle of whatever screen we've got, and sort of represent that content nicely. So I'm going to save this out, see what it looks like over in this other browser window when I refresh, and you'll see that if we click down to section 2, it perfectly is in the center of our content, and we can go right to the different screens that we've got here. All right, perfect. So we're starting to get our structure together. Let's work on the navigation now. And so I'm going to turn to the nav tag, and since that sits above the sections, I'll go ahead and deal with that. It's all in a header. So the nav is within the header area, and I don't have other things other than the nav inside of there, but I'll give the header a background. I'll make, let's say that background could be like black or something for the header itself, and we'll turn the header to have a background color. But things are kind of collapsing within that header. It doesn't have any real specific height, so we might need to give it a little bit of height to tell sort of, you know, how tall do we want this header to actually be. Maybe I want it to be about 50 pixels in height, and we'll give it a width here of 100%. And so unless I save and update, I need to hit Control S to save my content. I'll have to update that over here in order to see this stuff, but we can kind of see it in the live view over here. Okay, so my header's going across the page, but the nav is not quite working. I'm also getting sort of, you know, maybe I take away the black background for a second so we can kind of see this content. It's overflowing. It's not exactly what we want yet. So we can do a few other things here with our content. I do want to make sure that my navigation is working better. So I can tell that I'm going to go ahead and target the UL tag inside of the nav. And what we'll do with that is make sure that its list style is set to none, and that will get rid of the bullets that are there. I also need to get rid of the sort of margin and padding that might be on the list, and so that will push that right up against the edge once that's gone. Another thing I'd like to do with this is maybe pull the different elements next to each other. So I could tell that UL tag to make the list items display as flex as a way of doing layout for this. Sometimes you might float your list items, but if we say display as flex, then the different items are going to go one next to each other. I might say that I want to justify that content as being on the right hand side to have my navigation over there on the right as well. So there we go. We've got a couple elements here. I think what I'll also do is take the header and tell it to display as fixed, so that when we go up and down on the page, that the header itself does not change. So as we scroll with a fixed navigation here, then that header shouldn't scroll. And usually if I'm saying display fixed, I want to say the position of where that's going to be. So it's going to be at the top and the left. We can get this fixed position here, and I'll refresh this. There's that header, and then with a display fixed, it shouldn't scroll with the page. But it is scrolling with the page. I did something wrong. And of course, I didn't mean display here. I meant to say position needs to be fixed. So the property there is position, and when you're using top and left as offsets, that's with the position. So once that's set and we refresh over here, that particular content shouldn't scroll with the page. Of course, I didn't give it a background right now, so we can't see it per se. I'm going to maybe keep the background as white to start with. So I'll type that back out and make the background just be white. And so we can see that particular content. Once I save and refresh over here, we can see that. I'm going to go back to the live view to see those changes live. Okay, moving forward with our navigation. So I don't love the link look. There's too much separation. We can turn that more into looking like buttons. And so let's go ahead and target the A tags that are inside of the navigation here. And what we'll do is tell them to display as block elements so that the whole thing is going to be clickable as we add some size. We maybe give a little padding around them. I'm going to say maybe 10 pixels of padding. That will separate those out a bit. What we could do is give them a background color so we can see these a bit better. I'm going to go ahead and add in a kind of greenish background here. Maybe I've got a color reference that I'm going to work with to just get this sort of tealish green kind of look to these. as the background, and I'm going to turn the color of the actual text into white. Now I don't want the underline, so that's text decoration is the property that allows me to remove that underline. That's there we go. And then I do want to separate these out from one another, so I'm going to say that we're going to get a little bit of margin in between them. Maybe that margin is just like 2 VW. That's a little more than I wanted. Maybe 1 VW. We can see kind of what that margin might look like. Okay, and then from there, might want to round the corners off, I think, of these. I can say border radius, just kind of round the corners of these off, maybe just about 10 pixel rounded corners. And let's give these a height. I'm going to say that the height there is maybe 40. And my header itself might need to be a little bit taller to sort of make enough room here for this varying content. So that's looking a little bit better at 60 pixels. The one thing is I'm getting a viewport margin even on the top and bottom. So I might want to make sure that my sort of margin here makes sense. And so if I had 10 pixels on the top and bottom, that's a very specific value, and then a height of 40, that all adds up to a height of 60 for my overall, so that I make sure that I've got even values there. The space between each of these is going to vary a little bit based on the screen size. So if we get a smaller screen, they'll kind of get closer together, and if we have a larger screen, they'll sort of separate out a little bit from one another if we're doing it with viewport units. So if I didn't want that sort of that level of change, I could make this more specific and like a hard-coded number like 10 pixels or something, so that wouldn't change from screen to screen. I think I'll turn my header background back to black and turn the white one off and see what that looks like just with a black header. Pretty simple here. I'm going to save my page and go over here and refresh and see what sort of functionality I'm getting now. At least my navigation should be persistent and stay up there as I go from page to page. The one thing that I might want to consider is making sure that I'm considering the amount of space that right now my content is kind of underlaying that, and that works fine. But if I had content at the top or something, we wouldn't be giving it quite enough space to have that up there. So what I mean by that is, let's say we changed the alignments of some of this stuff, where we were aligning some of the items that were in here a little bit differently. So if I wasn't potentially doing some of this stuff with justifying some of the section content, let's see what would happen here. These would come up in that particular case, right? And they might be too tight to that edge. So one thing we might consider for our sections is to have some additional padding on the top. So if I wanted this 8 VW padding, that's fine, but maybe I want to add another sort of 60 pixels to account for the top of that header. So one thing I could do is make sure that the padding on the top, I'm going to use a calc function here, value, and in the calc function I could say that I wanted it to be 8 VW, but I also want to make sure that I account for the 60 pixels of the header, and then that would push this other content down so that it's a little further from the top. So if we were to do these different sections now and click down the page, if I save this with that being more at the top, these sections potentially, and let's save and refresh. There we go. These sections would be at the top, but they'd be making enough room here for that header and not crowd or have content kind of go under there. So that would be one way that I could adjust that to make sure that this works better for any kind of size of content. I still want my content to be centered, so I'm going to justify that into the center, which with our column alignment here will function to center that content. So once I refresh, we'll see that that's back into the center. Okay, so We've made a lot of progress on the basic structure of our website here. We're able to scroll down to these varying sections, and we can also jump down to those sections. We've got 3 sections of content all on one page. So if we're doing a single page website, we can kind of get a sense of what those might look like. But there's some behavior here that I don't love. So this idea of clicking and having it just jump to the next section, and I don't really get a sense that we scroll down the page to that section. It's a bit jarring in a way, and for the user, they might not realize if they went to a new page or if they're on the same page or what. So I'd like it to scroll down to that section. The other thing is if I'm scrolling, I have a kind of a hard time getting just my section in the right spot, right? Like as I'm scrolling down, it's like I go too far or not enough. And so it'd be nice if the section snapped to the right location. And we can do some other fun things in relation to the background images and how the scroll works, maybe to have some parallax scrolling effects. So I'm going to start implementing those things in the next video.